Hello, everybody. My name is Vedansh Kashyap. I am the president of the West Cluster Model UN team. Today, we are going to be covering Model UN basics. This is our first content presentation, and the topics we will cover are roll call, GSL, and mode passing. Vinod, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, my name is Vinod Venkatraman, and I'm the parliamentarian for Shepton Model UN for the 2022 to 2023 school year.
And I'm Jaime Sanabria. I am the Crisis Committee Vice President for the entire West Cluster.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rizwan Khan, and I'm looking forward to be here.
Okay. So starting with the opening in a MUN conference, the way it begins is normally your chair or your dais. After introducing themselves and their co-chairs or clerks, they will enter roll call. This doesn't need a motion. You simply enter roll call at the chair's discretion. They will call out each country's name or each character name individually, and they will ask for either one of two things, present or present voting. When you're present, you are present, but you're not obligated to vote on a resolution. And when you're present voting on each resolution presented on the floor, you are obligated to vote on those resolutions. And you can then motion to open debate as a delegate by raising your placard. And when you motion to open debate, that's basically just entering session. There's nothing more to it. And then when you motion to set the agenda, you are motioning to set a topic. So for example, you could raise your placard, hopefully get chosen by the chair, and you could motion the delegate of Portugal motions for a motion to set the agenda to topic A or topic B. It depends on how many topics there are in the committee. Now, after that, you will vote on that agenda setting, and then you will enter most likely you should motion to open the general speakers list. So how this works, you might have heard what a GSL is. A GSL is essentially you presenting your country or your character's stance in regard to the issue, which was the issue being presented by the agenda setting. So we have a couple of examples of these GSLs we'll get into later. But in essence, you are just summarizing what your country or character's goals are and how you intend to kind of achieve those goals throughout the session in committee. And just a couple of basics, there will normally be no more than 1 to 3 chairs. Again, depending on the size of the committee and the conference, you could have 25, 50 countries. And then placards, I already mentioned, you just use them to identify yourself, identify other countries or characters in the room, make sure to have them out, lifted up. I'm not sure if I have a placard with me now. If not, does someone else in the room right now have a placard they could show for the screen?
I know, but it's basically just a piece of paper that says your country's name and probably what delegation you're part of, but it just basically identifies you.
Yeah. Okay. Here's an example of a placard. This is from Reisman from a crisis committee. This was a character rather than a country, which is a bit weird. But I have a few more. It's, again, like the note said, just a piece of paper, like Madonna displaying that shows who you are, helps you identify the other people in the room, and it makes note passing much more easier, and you use it for voting and roll call. And for research is a crucial part of Model UN, both in crisis and standard committees. Your research will be crucial to kind of figuring out what your country or character stance is and what you should do to further that stance. Kind of researching past UN actions in regard to the topic is pretty important. Researching your country's past stance and even present stance. Researching other countries' stances, that way you can more easily form a bloc or an alliance with other countries which share similar interests out of your own. And it's just always better to have more research, be more knowledgeable in regard to stances and the topic. Now, for notepads are, you can just use them again, simple little sticky notepad, passing notes, because you're not allowed to speak in the middle of a speech. It's disrespectful and it's breaking decorum. And lastly, pens, just make sure to bring your own pen and paper or pencil, whatever you prefer, to a conference for that note writing. But that should be it for the...
A lot of terms that he talked about, like blocks, etc., we'll talk about more later. But But next is just a little bit more elaboration on the roll call aspect of Model UN. So there are two options as a delegation that you can choose. First is present, and the other option is present and voting. So whenever they're calling your roll and like they call up your country, you can either say present or present and voting. So basically what present means is that you are here in the delegation, but you are not required to vote for resolutions. You can abstain from voting, and abstain basically just means refrain or not to vote. But if you're present in voting, you have to vote for all the different resolutions that are presented. Honestly, no one really cares if you choose present or present in voting. Just choose whichever one you feel more comfortable with. And that doesn't mean that you can't vote for like parliamentary or procedural votes, like motions for like a moderated caucus or an unmoderated caucus, which we'll also talk about later. Those everybody is required to vote for. This present and voting, the abstaining clause at the present is only applicable for resolution voting. And this happens at the beginning of every session, the roll call.
And before Rizwan goes ahead for the next slide, I just wanted to mention that when would it be strategic to be present? So, for example, if you are the delegate of China and your committee deals with the security matters or other controversial topics, you could abstain from voting for resolutions. And that would be strategic in the sense that you can still keep your alliances with other countries and still promote collaboration and cooperation. But if it means sticking to your stance and saying no versus abstaining, it is preferred, especially Model UN, to abstain so that you can still be part of the resolution writing process and still be part of bringing a solution to the table. All right, thank you, Vinod. Rizwan, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just we just touched on the beginning part, but this is like a overview essentially of like the layout of a Model UN agenda, you know, what you're gonna do. So first, like we just talked about, roll call, which is, you know, just like attendance. Then you're gonna set the agenda, which is usually there's 1 to 2 topics. The higher, more prolific conferences will usually have 2. And that's when you decide which one. It usually is the first one that comes up in the background guide. And then usually where you're going to go into a speakers list, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But the speakers list is essentially like an introduction into your country's stance and what you believe. And also, you can also talk about like different allies that you want to work with. And then after the speakers list, you're going to usually go into 2 things, moderated or unmoderated. From my experience, it's usually been moderated that comes first. And this is where you dive in a little bit more into like the topic, like specifics. For example, you could go into a motion for a moderated caucus on potential solutions. You want to be as specific as possible. Sometimes I've had, you know, where people want to define certain terms. Like if you're going into like discrimination of LGBTQ, someone may say, you know, motion for a moderated caucus to define what discrimination means in the context of the problem. And then the other option is the unmoderated caucus. This usually happens after moderated, but it could happen before. This is when you're going to get together with different countries and form what's called like a block, or just go around talking with other delegations and nations to see what their view is. And this is pretty vital because this is where you're going to start forming, like I just said, a block or a team that you eventually want to write a resolution with. So this is where you get to share ideas and then join with delegations that have a similar view as you. And then that usually goes into resolution writing. And what that is you're just trying to tackle a specific problem in the problem itself. So, for example, like I brought up, like discrimination of LGBTQ members, you may want to go into like persecution by police in like a Middle Eastern government, something like that, what you want to tackle. And you do that with your bloc or the countries that you allied yourself with. And then after that, you're going to introduce the resolution and then or, you know, what you have decided to tackle. And then you're going to introduce pro-con speakers to votes. And then you're going to have a pro and a con speaker, one pro, one con, or 2 pro, 2 con. It depends on, you know, what the motion is. And then you may have amendments if, you know, somebody wants to have amend, something's in the resolution they want to change, or it could also just be an individual amendment that you want to get done. And then you're going to go into voting on the resolution to see if it passes. For voting, it's usually going to be a simple majority to pass the resolution. Then after that, you're going to go back up and introduce the next resolution. And then you're going to just recycle again to go to the next topic.
Absolutely. And we want you guys to keep this diagram in mind as we go through these different content meetings, because having an overview of what is going to happen at a conference is going to help you become a better student of Model UN, and also prepare you better for conferences, as you can expect what is coming next, and also plan accordingly, because some conferences are 2 days, some are 1 day. So this timeline Rizwan just went over may happen at a faster pace or a slower pace, depending on the length of the conference and the size of the committee. So, but this is something to keep in mind as we go through these presentations.
Yeah, feel free to screenshot this image and save it so you have quick access to it at any time. And we'll move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Vinod. So we have talked about a GSL speech, right? GSL again stands for General Speakers List. Now, what is actually in the speech, right? Before I get into what is in the speech, I would like to mention how much time you have to give the speech. You may have 60 seconds, you may have 90 seconds, and the variability in the time you are given depends on what the motion gives you. If you were to motion for a GSL speech for 60 seconds, you will be given 60 seconds. If someone else were to motion for one that was 90 seconds long and the committee agreed upon that motion, you would have to give a 90-second GSL speech. But as a beginner, as you are learning to do Model UN, I would recommend to write a speech that is about 60 seconds long. So even if you are provided 90 seconds, you can yield your time to questions or other things, and we'll get into that later. But it's always safer to give a speech that ends on time than going over time. So what is in a GSL speech? The first thing you want to open with is, what is the topic of discussion? What are we discussing as a committee? And this can be a few sentences about the current state of the topic. A lot of students include statistics to open their speech in order to get the attention of their audience and hook them into why this problem is important and why the committee needs to act to respond to it. After you discuss the topic, the next part is the country's stance. Every single student in Model UN, every single delegate is going to be representing a country. And your country is going to have a specific stance that is unique, and you have to figure out that stance. And that comes with research, that comes with understanding what your country has done in the past to truly understand what is their stance on the topic. Next, we have proposed solutions. Proposed solutions are the end of the resolution, and this is when you connect your country's stance to how can you actually contribute and help solve the topic. Perhaps your country has implemented a system that has been effective in addressing the topic, and you want to make that system available worldwide, internationally. Perhaps there needs to be a new solution. Or again, there's multiple ways to go about proposing solutions. But one thing I always recommend is keep your thoughts organized. You don't want to ramble on. You want to keep them organized. And a lot of delegates that are part of our West Cluster Model UN team use a 3-pronged approach, a 4-pronged approach to detail what are the different parts of their solution. Because if you're able to present a solution that has multiple parts in an organized manner, people are going to remember that. And people are going to gravitate towards you when it comes time to choose a leader of a block. And we'll get to that later. But we say the purpose down here. What is the purpose of a GSL? A GSL speech is very, very powerful in starting your conference. If you are the first speaker and you deliver a very powerful message through your speech and you really get the attention of the delegates in the room, you have a very good chance of being a prominent speaker, someone who holds a lot of influence for the rest of the committee. And I believe Hiram mentioned note passing with sticky notes and why you need these supplies. What is going to happen after you give your GSL speech, if you give a good one, is that people are going to pass you a note asking you questions about the 3 things we just went over. So some people, again, I don't know if we're going to get to this on the next slide, but some people ask, do you need to memorize your speech? Do you need to, read it off a piece of paper, read it off your computer, read it off your phone? our recommendation is that you should have your speech, you should have read it before. You should know your speech. Having it memorized can help, but you need to deliver your speech with impact, and that only comes with practice, and that comes with the preparation as well.
Okay, quickly on note passing as we're at 15 minutes. Note passing is just to communicate with other delegates during speeches or moderated caucuses, because during this time it's going to be really formal. Only one person is talking at a time. So on these note cards, just write your delegation's name. So if I'm South Korea, from South Korea to USA, for example. If I want to pass this note to the USA, these note passing can be used to agree or support with another delegate's stance or idea, and to request to join a block once unmoderated caucus starts, or which basically just means a request to work together during unmoderated caucus. You can also ask questions to other delegates using these note cards saying, hey, I was curious about what happens if this and this happens in your resolution or in your solution as you stated, for example, or why is this a bigger problem than that? Just any sort of question you have, you can ask. And also to plan resolution writing or coordinate speeches, just basically along the same lines as before. So yeah, we're just going to quickly wrap up this meeting with an example GSL from Hiram, and maybe Rizwan too, if time permits. But yeah, Hiram, if you want to take over and do that.
Sure. Thank you, Vinod. So here's an example of a GSL speech from the Colony Model UN in regard to the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, Berlin Wall, etc. So just remember to address everyone in the room. Honorable Chair, be respectful, and then you begin. Good morning, Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, esteemed guests. The delegate from the Second Republic of Portugal expresses its deepest concern regarding the status quo between this United Soviet Republics and the United States. While Portugal despises the odious apparatus of communist rule globally, which is slowly consuming our allies, however, as a nation that values global peace and stability, we urge this committee must set aside ideological differences for the greater good of humanity. The delegate from Portugal urges every country in the room, during this grave hour of peril, to think about what matters most to them, most to their country and most to their country's people, and realize that in focusing on being diplomatic in this time of uncertainty, we shall prevail as a committee. Lastly, in order to protect Portuguese interests, citizenry, and territorial sovereignty, both at home and abroad, Portugal will refuse to align itself with communist ideologies. That's all.
Really great speech, Hiram.
Thank you, Rizwan. If you want to go ahead.
Something just before I go ahead, I just want to say something he does really well is really using his voice. And that's something that is really necessary in Mod UN, but especially in the GSL, because, people are going to be listening to see, who is the loudest, who has the most idea, who sounds like they know what they're doing.
Who has the most
and
presence.
Don touched on this before, is how that is vital to, commanding a room. So if time permits, am I allowed to, go into mine?
We're at 18 minutes. I don't know if you want to stop it or.
Let's go ahead and give Rizwan's speech. It's okay.
So just like Hiram did, I'll first address the chair and the other delegates. Honorable Chair and esteemed delegates, the delegation of China would like to first welcome all delegates to this procession. The delegate is looking forward to fruitful debate in the coming hours. With this in mind, the delegation of China recognizes the problem of LGBTQ citizens in the Middle East not receiving full rights. However, it is also extremely important and vital to bear in mind the necessity to respect the culture of Qatari and Middle Eastern governments. Sharia and Islamic law forbids homosexuality at all levels, and that is something all delegations must respect. However, the delegation of China would like to tackle reports of torture against LGBTQ people by police, and also tackle digital restrictions against LGBTQ members. And then just end off with the delegation of China is looking forward to working with all.
Yeah, that speech is really good because it addresses what China would actually have done. For example, like China is not going to go on board and say, oh, we fully support LGBT rights or whatever. China would take a more, I guess, conservative stance to the issue, saying that, hey, this is the traditions that have been set forth by the laws in this country that have been here for centuries, and you must respect that. And then they also take another stance by saying, we do recognize that these laws are here, but we don't condone like the torture of these LGBTQ individuals as a result of the laws. So they're taking a sort of stance that China in the real world would pretty likely do. They're not going to go on board and say, we support LGBTQ rights, because that's not China. But at this, so I feel like he did a really good job tackling that. And in a delegation, even if you personally don't agree with the issue, even if you personally agree, like, these laws are bad, we should not criminalize homosexuality, it matters what your country in the real world actually believes about the issue. You're representing your country, not your own beliefs. So you're many times going to have to go against what you actually believe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vinod. And this concludes our presentation about the first GSL content. We'll see you guys at the next video, where we're going to cover research and position papers. Thank you.
Yeah, make sure you hit that like button, smash that subscribe button even harder, and comment down below if you have any further questions regarding what we've covered over today. We'd be happy to answer them.
Absolutely.